Most Americans pay somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000 a month just to keep the lights on and a roof overhead. That's the baseline. Mortgage or rent, electric bill, water bill, gas, property taxes. The system collects from you every 30 days, reliably, without asking whether you agreed to the terms. There are places in this country where that math stops working, not through any trick, because the regulations that create those monthly costs, the building codes, the permit offices, the utility mandates, the zoning restrictions, either don't exist in those places or have been actively rejected by the counties that govern them. The result is land you can buy for a few $100 an acre, structures you can build without a single inspection, and water you can collect from your roof without a permit. These are 16 specific locations, some tucked into rural townships, one the size of a small country, where the monthly cost of running a household can be reduced to almost nothing. Each one offers something real, each one asks for something back. And for retirees especially, the gap between almost free and actually livable comes down to one factor that most people overlook entirely. Here are the last 16 American places where you can live off-grid for almost $0. Vicksburg, Mississippi. Mississippi is the most affordable state in the country on a per-acre basis, and the rural land surrounding Vicksburg is one of the specific reasons why. Properties here run between $1,500 and $4,000 an acre, already a fraction of what you'd pay in most southern states. But the more consequential detail is what the county did with the statewide building code. It opted out. That opt-out isn't an oversight, it's a policy decision. Warren County, home to Vicksburg, has formally rejected the state's residential building code along with neighboring Adams County. Alternative structures, shipping containers, earthbag homes, small cabins built without architect approval are legal in unincorporated areas without the permit costs that apply almost everywhere else. The climate is genuinely agricultural. The growing season stretches long into the fall, and the annual rainfall makes water scarcity essentially a non-issue. A small solar array handles electricity, a rainwater catchment system handles water, and a property tax bill at roughly 0.81% of assessed value means holding the land year after year stays cheap. The trade-off is humidity and weather. This region sits in tornado and hurricane territory, which means any structure you build, even without code enforcement watching, needs to be built to handle what the sky can throw at it. That's not a reason to walk away. It's a reason to build carefully. And if you think Mississippi's affordability is surprising, the next one on this list takes the same premise deeper into the Ozarks, Melbourne, Arkansas. A few hundred miles northwest, the rural townships surrounding Melbourne in the Arkansas Ozark Highlands offer a version of the same premise with more trees and cooler air. Land there can be found for between $1,000 and $3,000 an acre, below the state median, which is already low. The area has no mandatory building codes in its unincorporated zones and no statewide tiny house regulations to navigate. That combination allows for the construction or placement of small cabins or alternative dwellings without the permit fees that have become standard in northwest Arkansas's more developed towns. What this area has that the desert locations on this list don't is water. Rivers and springs run through the region, and the rainfall is consistent enough that irrigation is rarely a concern for a food-focused homestead. A 200-day growing season gives enough time to raise most of what a household needs in vegetables and, with the right setup, protein. The effective property tax rate sits around 0.66%, not the lowest on this list, but sustainable on a retirement income. Proximity to the Buffalo River and Ozark National Forest adds recreational value that doesn't show up in any financial calculation, but matters significantly to people planning to spend their days outdoors. Antlers, Oklahoma. Southeastern Oklahoma doesn't come up in most off-grid conversations. That's partly why it's still cheap. The rural land around Antlers, tucked into the Kiamichi Mountains, is dense timberland with reliable creek access. Parcels routinely list for between $19,000 and $50,000 for 10 to 20 acres, roughly $1,000 to $2,500 an acre. The effective property tax rate is 0.56%, with a median annual bill around $395. Oklahoma's right to farm laws protect agricultural and self-sufficient land use from nuisance complaints, and building codes in unincorporated areas are relaxed enough that a small homestead with livestock and a kitchen garden operates without ongoing regulatory friction. The growing season pushes past 200 days. The rainfall is reliable. The timber is abundant enough that heating costs, for anyone with a wood stove and a chainsaw, trend towards zero. Antlers is not a glamorous destination. The roads are winding, the nearest urban amenities require a significant drive, and the region sits in storm country. But for a retiree who wants land, privacy, and a low carrying cost without the physical extremes of a desert or Arctic environment, it offers a combination that few towns in any state can match at this price point. Spencer, West Virginia. West Virginia has a reputation for affordability, and the rural land around Spencer is where that reputation has the most substance for off-grid purposes. The wooded terrain of the Appalachian Hills provides two things the western half of this list cannot: free heating fuel and free water. Wood is the practical energy currency here. The land is covered in it, and a wood stove fueled from timber harvested on site eliminates the propane or electric heating bill that would otherwise be the single largest energy expense through a mountain winter. The Appalachian rainfall means shallow wells, springs, and rainwater catchment all work without the engineering complexity required in drier climates. The effective property tax rate is 0.59%. While many rural zones in West Virginia operate under relaxed residential building codes, though some trade permits, electrical and septic, are still required locally. What this area doesn't have is strong solar potential. At roughly 3.65 kilowatt hours per square meter per day, it sits near the lower end of what makes a solar array financially sensible. A hybrid approach, wood for heat, modest solar for electricity, and LED efficiency throughout, closes that gap without a large capital investment. Rowan General Hospital sits in Spencer itself, providing local medical access. For retirees, that proximity matters more than any other variable on the list. 30 minutes to a functioning emergency room changes the risk calculation for aging in place on remote land. Fort Kent, Maine. The largest county east of the Mississippi is mostly empty. The unorganized territories surrounding Fort Kent and Aroostook County contain more timber and fresh water than most people will ever use. For off-grid purposes, the calculus here is almost entirely about fuel and water. Both are effectively free. Heating via wood stove using timber from the land is the dominant strategy. The region's high annual rainfall makes well drilling or rainwater catchment straightforward. A solar array here averages around 4.19 kilowatt hours per square meter per day, lower than the Southwest, but workable for a modest electrical load. Property taxes in Maine run higher than most states on this list at around 1.24%, but the unorganized territories often carry significantly lower assessments. They are bringing the actual bill down. The honest constraint is winter, not cold as an abstraction, cold as a physical requirement. Long stretches below zero, significant snowfall, and short winter days create a lifestyle that demands physical capability and genuine preparation. Northern Maine Medical Center serves Fort Kent directly, though the deepest unorganized areas can be 3 hours from a major medical hub. For people who handle cold well and value extreme privacy, this corner of Maine offers a version of off-grid living that the warmer towns on this list simply cannot replicate in terms of water abundance and isolation. Eminence, Missouri. Eminence is where most people planning off-grid life in the eastern United States eventually land, often because they didn't plan to. The Missouri Ozarks region around this small town has built a quiet reputation among homesteaders for one specific reason: there are no residential building codes here. Missouri has no mandatory statewide residential code. Building regulations are adopted locally, and Shannon County, home to Eminence, has declined to adopt any version of the International Residential Code or International Building Code. Construction of alternative dwellings, cob houses, earthbag structures, straw bale builds, proceeds without architectural stamps, engineering permits, or inspection timelines. You build as your budget allows, and no one from the county is coming to sign off. And land runs between $4,100 and $5,200 an acre. The current river and numerous perennial springs make water access practical without deep wells or hauling. A growing season around 260 days supports serious food production. The property tax effective rate is 0.89%. The humidity is the persistent challenge. The Ozarks average between 60 and 75% relative humidity, which affects natural building materials over time and requires design choices that account for moisture. Build for it from the start, and the land around Eminence works well. Ignore it, and the Ozarks will eventually remind you it's there. Duchesne, Utah. About 90 minutes east of Salt Lake City, the rural land surrounding Duchesne has developed a following among Mountain West homesteaders who want flexibility without full wilderness isolation. The draw is the zoning, agricultural A5 classification, which permits residential builds, livestock, and small-scale farming under fewer restrictions than what you'd find in more developed Utah towns. Land prices trend below the state median in the rural zones. The approach that works here, and that the local culture generally supports, is incremental. Start with an RV or a simple cabin. Add infrastructure over time as funds allow. Utah's homestead exemption protects up to $100,000 of equity from creditors, giving the phased approach a legal cushion. The landscape combines high desert and alpine forest. Icy Starvation Reservoir and the Uinta Basin are within reach for fishing and hunting, which supplements any food budget meaningfully. Solar potential runs between 5.5 and 6.0 peak sun hours, a strong figure for an off-grid electrical setup. Property taxes sit around 0.57% of assessed value. The seasonal realities require preparation for mountain winters and spring mud season, but the community around Duchesne is built around self-reliance in a way that makes the learning curve less steep than it would be in more remote territory. It's the kind of place where the neighbors have probably already figured out the same problem you're about to face. Lakeview, Oregon. Oregon has strict land use laws statewide, but the high desert surrounding Lakeview along the state's southern border operates with considerably more room. It's one of the least populated regions in the Pacific Northwest, and the regulations around alternative energy and off-grid setups are more permissive than the state's reputation suggests. Oregon allows residents to collect rainwater from rooftops without a permit. Around Lakeview, that collection combines with consistent high desert solar to cover most household electrical and water needs. Lake County also protects large parcel land ownership outside city limits, with some exemptions extending to 160 acres. For anyone who wants a substantial land base, that's a relevant number. The effective property tax rate runs around 0.92%. As the BLM land surrounding the area functions as an enormous public backyard for recreation and hunting, effectively expanding the usable landscape beyond whatever parcel you own. The honest trade-off is temperature swing. Summer afternoons here are intense. Winter nights drop hard. Managing that range without a grid connection requires either a high thermal mass structure or very good insulation, and those two things carry very different price tags. Marquette, Kansas. Every other location on this list requires buying land first. Marquette skips that step entirely. The town of roughly 600 people has run a free land program to address population decline. Applicants who are approved receive a residential lot at no cost, with the requirement that construction begin within 120 days and the home be completed within 1 year. The land costs $0. This is a different model entirely. It's grid adjacent rather than wilderness off-grid. The goal isn't regulatory freedom in the wilderness sense. It's eliminating the single largest upfront cost of any homestead, which is land acquisition. By zeroing that out, a buyer can direct their entire budget toward building an efficient, low-energy home that carries minimal monthly costs once occupied. So Marquette is picturesque and, by reported accounts, safe. The school systems function well. The community is intact. For a retiree who wants to reduce housing costs to near zero without taking on the physical demands of remote desert or Arctic living, this program represents a real path. The Kansas Sun sits at a middle rank statewide for solar intensity. A modest system handles the electrical load of a well-insulated small home. With no mortgage and no land payment, the monthly overhead on a paid-off Marquette build can be surprisingly low, without a single night of sub-zero isolation. San Luis, Colorado. San Luis and the surrounding San Luis Valley sit at altitude, and the area has been drawing off-grid buyers long enough that land prices have risen. But 5-acre lots can still be found under $20,000 near this region, often with owner financing that requires little down, which matters if you're working from a fixed income. Costilla County, home to San Luis, has adopted building codes but is known for a relaxed approach to alternative energy systems and small dwellings. Colorado amended its water laws to allow homeowners to collect up to 110 gallons of rainwater for use on their property. That's a relatively small allowance, something to plan around rather than rely on as a primary water source in an arid high valley. What this area offers is sun, over 300 sunny days per year, with solar performance around 5.85 kilowatt hours per square meter per day. The effective property tax rate is 0.53%, with a median annual bill around $328. The median home price in the county sits around $81,990, a remarkably low figure for a Colorado address with mountain views. Temperature management is the lifestyle variable. Sub-zero winter nights require serious construction or serious heating. The combination of high thermal mass design and a small wood stove covers the gap for most residents who've worked out the math before they broke ground. Grangeville, Idaho. Grangeville anchors Idaho County, the largest county in the state by land area, over 8,500 square miles. The county passed Ordinance 67 in 2020, classifying all unincorporated land as multi-use with no restrictions. The ordinance explicitly states that the county does not review plans or inspect residential construction. The owner-builder assumes full responsibility for structural integrity. That's a specific legal stance, not a gray area. With no permit trail and no inspection requirements, construction can proceed incrementally. No architect required, no approved plans, no compliance timeline forcing expenditure before you're ready. Idaho has no mandated limit on the size of cisterns or rainwater collection, provided the water is harvested before entering a natural waterway. For a homesteader who wants a gravity-fed water system that requires no electrical input after initial installation, that permissive stance is a significant operational advantage. Remote rural parcels are available below the state median land price, though remote here can mean access roads requiring four-wheel drive and substantial drives to basic services. The effective property tax rate is 0.48%, among the lowest in the western United States. Syringa General Hospital sits within Grangeville's town center. For retirees placing a homestead within reasonable driving distance, that hospital is the anchor that makes this region viable for the long term, not just for the first few years of good health. Sierra Vista, Arizona. Most Arizona towns fall under the International Residential Code. The jurisdiction around Sierra Vista adopted it too, but then created a formal exit ramp. Any property over 4 acres zoned as rural qualifies for an owner-builder exemption from building codes, provided the owner signs an acknowledgement that the structure is for their own use and may not meet code. That's a legal mechanism written into county policy. It covers composting toilets and gray water systems, provided they meet the health department's basic standards for septic. Land in the more remote high desert plains of Cochise County can still be found for $400 to $1,000 an acre. The elevation around Sierra Vista is higher than Phoenix, which drops the summer heat load considerably and reduces the energy required for cooling. But the peak sun hours run between 6.5 and 7.5. Strong figures for a solar array doing real work year-round. The practical retiree angle is proximity to the Mexican border. Nearby towns like Naco provide access to lower-cost dental and pharmaceutical services, which is a meaningful consideration for anyone living on a fixed income without comprehensive dental coverage. The medical hubs in Sierra Vista and Bisbee cover more acute care needs. For a retiree who has run the full numbers on healthcare costs, this geography isn't incidental, it's part of the financial plan. Clifton, Arizona. Every other Arizona jurisdiction adopted building codes. The county surrounding Clifton didn't. Greenlee County is the one county in the state with confirmed no residential building codes whatsoever. Not a relaxed version, not an opt-out provision, but a complete absence of residential code enforcement. For alternative builders working in cob, adobe, or recycled materials, that distinction carries real weight. Clifton is rugged territory. Mining and ranching define its economy. Land listings are limited, and when parcels become available, they tend to go to buyers who know the area specifically. But what the land around Clifton offers any buyer who gets in is total structural freedom combined with the highest solar potential in the state. The summer peak sun hours here exceed 7.0, among the highest figures in the world for a residential location. A modest solar array in this area outproduces larger systems installed in most other parts of the country. The county provides zoning and floodplain status at no cost, which is the one essential verification for any build site where no structural inspections will follow. Clifton's health department manages septic and water permits for the surrounding area. Water strategy is primarily hauled or stored, which requires upfront infrastructure infrastructure investment before the near zero monthly costs become real. The tax incentives for renewable systems add a modest financial benefit on top of the energy production advantage. Socorro, New Mexico. New Mexico consistently ranks near the top for off-grid feasibility, and the land surrounding Socorro earns that ranking on two specific grounds. First, the county has no construction office and no active building code enforcement in unincorporated areas. Earthship-style builds and super adobe construction, methods that use the local soil itself as the primary building material, proceed here without permit costs. Second, the land economics are among the lowest in the contiguous United States. Desert tracts can be found for as low as $2,500 per single acre, with larger parcels averaging under $1,000 per acre when purchased in bulk. The solar position is second in the country. Yet at 6.77 kilowatt hours per square meter per day with over 300 sunny days annually, a 5 kilowatt system generates upwards of 8,100 kilowatt hours per year, enough to run a household and carry a surplus. Water is the constraint that shapes every decision in this region. New Mexico operates under a prior appropriation doctrine, which means securing water rights for a well requires navigating a legal framework before a single shovel goes in the ground. Rainwater harvesting is legal and encouraged, but in a climate with infrequent storm events, residents typically supplement with large storage tanks and regular hauling. It's a logistics problem with solutions, but those solutions require planning and upfront investment before the almost free status becomes operational. Sierra Blanca, Texas. In the Trans-Pecos region of far west Texas, 40-acre parcels surrounding Sierra Blanca routinely sell for $20,000 to $30,000 total. That comes out to $500 to $750 an acre, among the lowest prices for contiguous acreage anywhere in the lower 48 states. The area has no active building code enforcement in unincorporated zones. Shipping containers, RVs, and tiny homes are used as permanent dwellings throughout the region. Texas's tax structure then adds a second layer of financial relief. With an agricultural or wildlife management exemption, property taxes on a 40-acre homestead can drop by 70 to 90%. The resulting annual tax bill can fall under $100. Texas has no state income tax. Yet for retirees drawing from retirement accounts or Social Security, that detail compounds the land cost advantage in ways that a headline acreage price doesn't capture. The hard constraint is water and distance. Wells in this high desert can run several hundred feet deep, making hauling the most practical strategy for most new residents. The nearest hospital services sit roughly 2 hours away in El Paso. That distance requires residents to carry meaningful first aid capability and reliable long-range communication. Starlink has become the functional solution for the latter. The financial case for Sierra Blanca's surrounding land is difficult to argue with on paper. The lifestyle case requires a clear-eyed assessment of what 2 hours from a hospital means when something goes wrong. Tokay, Alaska. Tok is a small interior Alaska community sitting at the junction of the Alaska Highway and the Glen Highway, and it falls within the unorganized borough, the designation for the portion of the state's wilderness that has no borough-level government. No government means no building codes, no permits, no zoning, and no property taxes. The carrying cost of land around Tok is zero. The state then adds something no other location on this list provides: the Alaska Permanent Fund Dividend. Every Alaska resident receives an annual cash payment, averaging between $1,000 and $3,000, funded by the state's oil revenue. Combined with zero property taxes and a subsistence lifestyle built around hunting and fishing, some residents report covering their basic annual expenses in a few weeks of outside cash work. Plus, the structures here are often dry cabins, buildings without indoor plumbing, because in temperatures that reach negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit, indoor water systems freeze without heating costs that would undermine the entire financial model. Heating comes from wood. Electricity in summer comes from solar, supplemented in winter by wind. Water comes from streams, lakes, or shallow wells. The growing season runs under 100 days. The isolation is genuine. The physical demands, splitting 5 to 10 cords of wood annually, maintaining equipment in extreme cold, living without consistent outside contact, are not manageable for everyone, and that's not a caveat thrown in at the end. It's the central fact of the place. But for the people who have run this calculation and found it suits them, Yatak sits at the far end of the spectrum, not just near zero cost of living, a place that actually pays you to be there. 16 locations, one pattern running through all of them. Every place on this list reduces the cost of living by eliminating something the standard American housing model treats as unavoidable. A mortgage, a utility bill, a permit fee, a property tax. The mechanism shifts by geography. The result is the same. A household that costs almost nothing to maintain, month after month, year after year. The research behind these locations also surfaces one consistent factor for the retiree specifically. The homesteads that work long term aren't the most remote ones. They're the ones positioned within roughly 45 minutes of a town with a functioning hospital, Eminence to West Plains, Grangeville to its hospital, Spencer to Roan General. That buffer, unincorporated land with no overhead, close enough to medical care that a difficult day doesn't become a catastrophe, is what separates an interesting experiment from a sustainable life. The trade-off isn't money versus freedom, it's overhead versus effort. Every dollar removed from the monthly bill goes back onto the daily workload in some form. Wood to split, water to haul, food to grow, systems to maintain. The question is whether that work is something you choose to do anyway, or something that will erode you over time. For the right person, in the right place, with the right preparation, the answer to that question makes almost zero feel like exactly enough.